My male roommate and I, a female, lived in a small duplex just a short walk from the university. Our street was always bustling with cars and people heading to and from campus, both day and night. Despite the town being small, our area, which included the college, was often considered the rough part of town, likely due to its older buildings and modest homes. There were a few homeless people around, but I got to know most of them while working at a fast food place, so I was familiar with the folks considered sketchy. Before this incident, I had never felt unsafe in the 6 years I lived there. I often walked to work and class since I didn't have a car, and driving caused me a lot of anxiety. Around 9 or 10 months ago, I was sitting in my living room at about 10 p.m., relaxing and watching TV. My roommate was in his room playing video games, which was his usual evening routine. I had ordered pizza for dinner earlier, but part of my order was missing when it arrived. I called the pizza place, and they apologized, saying someone would be back soon to deliver the rest. While I was waiting in the living room, there was a loud knock on my door. I was startled but assumed it was the pizza delivery person since I was expecting them. I went to answer the door, but it's important to note that we didn't have a peephole, and I couldn't see who was outside from the window. So, my only choice was to open the door. When I did, a middle-aged man I didn't know was standing on my porch. He wore a large puffy jacket, a black beanie, and heavy boots. It was dark, so I couldn't see his face clearly, and I was caught off guard. I said hello, and he stepped back slightly, asking, "Is your husband home?" I was so confused I answered, "No." He then said, "Oh, can you come outside and help me with something real quick?" That made me uncomfortable, so I told him to hold on, shut and locked the door, and went to get my roommate. I explained what happened, and my roommate went outside to check, but the man had completely disappeared. It had only been about 5 minutes since I shut the door, so the man either left in a hurry or drove away. I felt uneasy because I was the only one who saw him, and my roommate saw no one. He advised me not to answer the door late at night unless I was sure who it was. The incident left me shaken, and I called my boyfriend, crying, to tell him what happened. He came over to check on me. Things returned to normal, but I was still extra cautious at night, not wanting a repeat of that experience. Fast forward to mid-February, around 8 p.m., I was again sitting in the living room watching TV. I might have been waiting for a food delivery, though I can't remember for sure. Another loud knock came at the door, and once again, I was startled. I answered the door, and I'm almost certain it was the same man, wearing the same clothes. He asked again if my husband was home, and this time I slammed the door shut, locked it, and got my roommate. By the time he went outside, the man had disappeared again. At that point, I was terrified. The first time seemed like a random encounter, but after the second time, I was really scared. My roommate and I debated whether to call the police, and I finally did. I reported the incident to the non-emergency line, and a police officer came by. They took a description of the man and said they would keep an eye out for him. The officer asked if I noticed anything specific, like if the man had something in his hand or if there was a car nearby, but I hadn't seen anything like that. I left a note in my neighbor's mailbox to warn her since there was a girl my age living there, and I wanted her to be safe. Nothing like that happened again before I moved out, but the experience stuck with me, and it still makes me anxious. Now, I'm very cautious every time I leave my house, even during the day. This happened roughly 10 years ago in southern UK. I'm 28 now, but at the time, I was about 18 and working part-time at a gas station on a road connecting a quiet village to a larger highway leading to a nearby city. The village itself was really upscale, the kind of place where only the wealthy could afford to live. It was mostly residential with large houses, beautiful gardens, and expensive cars. There weren't many shops, with the only big one being a Waitrose, showing how high-end the area was. The rest of the shops were small boutiques or fancy privately owned grocery stores. I've always been into cars, so it was fun to see luxury sports cars parked outside. This is where I met Michael. He was in his late 40s, had dark hair, and dressed well, always in brands like Gant or Ralph Lauren. On workdays, he wore tailored canali suits. Michael was a nice guy, very polite, which was rare because most locals were rude if you weren't as wealthy as they were. Michael stood out because he didn't act like that. We often talked about his car collection or his expensive watches. He always wore a Rolex and drove either his Aston Martin, Range Rover, or Porsche, so we always had something to chat about. I found out he worked in finance, and we discussed my plans since I also wanted to work in finance. We had many friendly conversations until I left the job for an apprenticeship at my uncle's brokerage. Now, my uncle was involved in many businesses besides his brokerage and property investments. He also owned several takeaway places for extra income, so I occasionally helped as a delivery driver when one of his drivers didn't show up. It was a bit of extra work, but I didn't mind. Luckily, my uncle lived in the same village I mentioned earlier, and his pizza place was popular with the locals. This meant tips were usually generous, and my uncle would give me extra money for helping out. In the summer of 2008, I was asked to deliver some pizzas to a house on a prestigious road. This area was known for its grand homes and high-profile residents. The average house price here was over £1.4 million, so I was curious to see the homes up close. They were all gated, hidden behind trees and bushes, set far back from the road. I found the place, pressed the intercom, and a muffled voice responded with, "Yes." I gave the takeaway's name, and the gates slowly opened. I drove up the long driveway to a massive mock Georgian house with a separate 4-car garage. That's when I noticed Michael's personalized license plates on one of the cars, with his initials and numbers 1, 2, and 3. His wife's cars had the same style. As someone eager to work in finance, I was excited to see how Michael lived. I got out of my car, grabbed the pizzas, and when the double doors opened, a face I didn't recognize greeted me. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, thin with a shaved head. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just old worn jeans and sneakers. He was also holding something behind his back, but I couldn't see what it was. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, with an accent I didn't recognize. He told me to bring the pizzas to the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet, and the inside was as impressive as the outside. Feeling uneasy, I just stared at him, which seemed to upset him more. "Bring the pizza through," he said again, sounding more aggressive. Finally, I asked, "Where's Michael? Isn't this his house?" It's true that in moments like this, your instincts kick in, and mine were telling me something was very wrong. My mouth went dry, and every part of me wanted to leave. But I realized I was trapped on this gated property. Panic set in, and I felt sheer terror as I quickly dropped the pizzas, left my car, and decided my best chance was to run. I sprinted down the driveway and climbed over the wooden gates, which didn't have spikes. I could hear his footsteps crunching behind me, but I didn't look back. I managed to get over the gates and landed on the pavement, my heart pounding. Adrenaline kept me running for what felt like hours, though it was probably just 10 minutes. I finally made it to a nearby park, feeling safe enough to stop and call the police. One officer stayed with me to take my statement, while another patrol car went to investigate the property. At first, the police seemed doubtful or thought I was involved in something. But when my uncle arrived to pick me up and confirmed I was there to deliver pizza, they began to believe me. When they got to the property, no one was there, but they found my car with slashed tires and broken windows. I later found out Michael and his family were visiting relatives in Australia at the time. I never went back for another shift at the pizza place. Wealth and financial security can be an illusion. People are still people, and there are always disturbed individuals who act out their twisted behaviors. I usually prefer exploring on my own, especially when it comes to hiking. My friends aren't as active, and when they come along, they move slower, which holds me back. So one Saturday around 2 p.m., I decided to go for a hike by myself. The trail I chose was one I had hiked many times before, but only early in the morning when the air is cool and the path is quiet. Knowing the trail's length, I estimated I'd finish around sunset. It's about 9 miles round trip and has a steady uphill climb on the way back, making it a bit challenging. The first part of the trail winds through a dense forest, where the trees provide cool shade. The second part follows an open mountainside, offering wide views and more sunlight. Even with the sun high, the thick treetops blocked most of the light. As I started hiking, I passed a few hikers heading back. Seeing them made me realize I was among the last few still on the trail. The thought of being out there alone as it got darker pushed me to quicken my pace, ensuring I'd finish before sunset. Everything went smoothly at first as I hiked quickly. I reached the end, took a brief 5-minute break, and started heading back. By the time I was halfway, it was around 4 p.m., and the trail was quiet with no one in sight. I had passed most hikers earlier, so I was entirely alone on the way back. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, making the forest darker. As I climbed the steep part of the trail, the shadows lengthened, and the trees felt like they were closing in on me. Feeling a bit uneasy about being alone, I turned on my music to distract myself from the growing darkness. As I was walking, I saw something dark, maybe the size of a rabbit or skunk, dart across the trail. It didn't resemble any animal I knew, it was too fast and blurry, lacking a clear shape or color. Startled, I started jogging. The light continued to fade, and it was getting darker by the minute. Even though I knew the trail had been empty, I couldn't shake the feeling something was following me. To be safe, I pulled out my pocket knife, which I always carry for protection. Halfway through the forest, I grew tired of jogging and slowed to a fast-paced walk. As I did, I felt a strong urge to look back. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, but nothing seemed unusual. I kept up my fast pace for about half a mile and was nearing the trailhead when I looked back again. This time, I saw a dark figure, shaped like a human, about 30 feet behind me. The figure had a clear head and torso, but below the waist, it was just a dark blur. As soon as I saw it, the figure suddenly dashed into the trees. Terrified, I sprinted toward the trailhead. Fortunately, I was closer than I thought, and I was incredibly relieved to see the sunlight and my car. I ran so fast to my car that I didn't even notice the few people still in the parking lot preparing to leave. Once inside my car, shaking and trying to calm down, I finally saw them. I took a few moments to breathe deeply and steady my nerves before driving away. I haven't been hiking since that day, which was 2 months ago. After some research, I found out the trail was used in the late 1800s to travel between gold mining towns and was abandoned for nearly 100 years before reopening in the 1980s for recreation access to a swimming hole.